And then, we did very well in England, and then finally we came here, which was sort of where we wanted to do well.
Yeah.
Because all right.
Paul McCartney is one of the most celebrated musicians in history, having created countless beloved songs that shaped modern music. Yet despite his extraordinary success, he has privately harbored regrets about certain Beatles tracks for over 6 decades. These aren't obscure recordings that fans had forgotten. Instead, they are popular songs that millions adore, tracks that became part of the band's celebrated legacy. But for Paul, they represent moments when his artistic judgment faltered, when commercial pressure overtook creativity, or when circumstances beyond his control transformed his vision into something he never intended. The story begins with Maxwell's Silver Hammer, a song that appeared on the Abbey Road album in 1969. Paul conceived it as a playful, whimsical tune about a character who commits murders with a hammer. He believed the dark humor combined with a cheerful melody would create something clever and entertaining. However, his bandmates saw it completely differently. They found the song irritating and couldn't understand why Paul was so invested in it. The recording sessions for Maxwell's Silver Hammer occurred during a particularly difficult period for the Beatles. The band was fracturing, with tensions running high between all 4 members. John Lennon wanted to create raw, honest music that pushed artistic boundaries. George Harrison felt increasingly marginalized and wanted his own compositions to receive more respect. Ringo Starr simply hoped the constant arguments would stop. Into this volatile environment, Paul insisted on spending precious studio time perfecting what the others considered a trivial novelty song. The production process became grueling for everyone involved. Paul obsessed over achieving the perfect sound for the hammer strikes in the song, going so far as to bring an actual anvil into the famous Abbey Road studios. Take after take, they recorded the metallic clanging, while the other Beatles grew increasingly frustrated. Their longtime producer, George Martin, gently suggested moving on to other material, but Paul refused to let go. John openly ridiculed the song, dismissing it as the kind of old-fashioned music their grandmothers might enjoy. Despite all this pushback, Paul remained convinced he was right and everyone else was wrong. Looking back years later, Paul acknowledged his stubbornness. He admitted that he thought he knew better than everyone else in the room, even though they were trying to help him see the song's weaknesses. The track did make it onto the Abbey Road album, positioned among genuine masterpieces like Something and Here Comes the Sun. Now when Paul listens to that record, he skips over Maxwell's Silver Hammer because he finally hears what his bandmates heard all along. The melody might be catchy and the production technically sound, but the song lacks substance. It's a gimmick masquerading as art, a joke that only the person telling it found amusing. For Paul, this song taught him painful lessons about ego, collaboration, and the importance of listening to people who care enough to offer honest criticism. The second song on Paul's regret list is Wild Honey Pie, an even briefer and stranger inclusion on the White Album. This wasn't really meant to be a proper song at all. Paul was simply fooling around in the studio, looping his voice and guitar to create something that resembled a sound effect more than actual music. He recorded it as a joke between serious recording sessions, never imagining it would appear on a finished album. The White Album sessions in 1968 were uniquely chaotic. The band had recently returned from studying meditation in India, and they arrived back in London with dozens of new songs. They made an unusual decision to record everything without the usual filtering process. If any band member wanted their track included, it went on the album, without debate or quality control. This democratic approach sounds idealistic, but it meant that throwaway experiments and unfinished ideas could become permanent parts of their catalog. Wild Honey Pie consists entirely of Paul repeating the title words over and over, with various guitar sounds layered on top. The entire piece lasts less than a minute. There's no verse, no chorus, no musical structure, and no apparent purpose. Paul himself admits he was just messing around and wishes someone had stopped him from including it. George Martin, who usually served as a filter for questionable ideas, had less influence during the White Album sessions because the band was asserting more independence. Over the decades, some fans and critics have tried to find deeper meaning in Wild Honey Pie, interpreting it as avant-garde experimentation or social commentary. Paul knows the truth is far simpler. The track isn't deep or meaningful. It's just silly, the kind of spontaneous studio moment that should have remained a private memory rather than being pressed onto vinyl and sold to millions. This experience taught him about the importance of curation, recognizing that not every creative impulse deserves preservation, and that the line between spontaneity and sloppiness is thinner than anyone wants to admit. The third song Paul regrets is Obla-Di, Obla-Da, which presents a different kind of problem. Unlike the previous two, this one became enormously successful, charting worldwide and selling millions of copies. It remains one of the most recognizable Beatles songs ever recorded. Yet Paul dislikes it intensely, not because it failed, but because it succeeded for all the wrong reasons. Paul wrote this ska-influenced pop song inspired by a Nigerian friend who used the phrase as a greeting. The lyrics tell a simple story about two characters named Desmond and Molly who are market vendors living ordinary lives. On the surface, it seems harmless enough, but the recording process revealed deeper problems. Paul demanded perfection, insisting on countless takes trying to capture an elusive magical quality that never materialized. The more they recorded, the more hollow and forced the song sounded. John Lennon despised Obla-Di, Obla-Da from the beginning, dismissing it as lightweight commercial music beneath the band's artistic standards. Jairus Harrison found it tedious and repetitive. Even Ringo Starr, usually the diplomatic peacekeeper, grew frustrated with the endless recording sessions. Paul remembered that they must have recorded it 100 times, while John's mood darkened with each repetition. Rather than bringing the band together, the song created division and resentment.
Paul pushed forward anyway, either chasing a hit single or simply being too stubborn to admit his bandmates might be right. When the song became a massive commercial success, it should have felt like vindication. Instead, it confirmed John's fears that Paul was prioritizing popularity over artistic integrity, choosing to please casual listeners rather than push creative boundaries. The song's success created a rift between the two songwriters that never fully healed. Decades later, Paul admitted he tried too hard to be clever and catchy, while forgetting to make the song meaningful. Obla-Di, Obla-Da has no emotional depth or weight, no real reason to exist beyond being pleasant background music. It represents calculation disguised as joy. Every time Paul hears it playing in a grocery store or cafe, he's reminded of the moment he chose commercial appeal over his brother's respect and the band's artistic vision. The fourth regrettable song is Hello Goodbye, released as a single in November 1967. The Beatles desperately needed a hit following the death of their manager Brian Epstein, and Paul delivered exactly what was required. He wrote it in a single afternoon, stringing together simple opposites like a children's game. Hello, goodbye, yes, no, stop, go. It was transparent, cynical songwriting, and it went straight to number one. The song contains no story, no genuine emotion, no purpose beyond being catchy and radio-friendly. Paul knew this while writing it. He was constructing a commercial product rather than creating art. The Beatles had always balanced commerce with creativity, but this marked the first time Paul openly crossed into pure formula. The structure was predictable: verse, chorus, repetitive hook, add some nonsense syllables at the end for flavor, and call it finished. John saw through the artifice immediately, calling it another of Paul's songs, with a tone that conveyed clear disdain. He understood it was manufactured and safe, designed for radio programmers rather than genuine listeners. George barely engaged during recording, going through the motions like a hired session musician. The song required so little creativity from them that they could have performed their parts with minimal effort. Paul has explained that he felt pressured and needed to deliver a single quickly, but his voice carries guilt when discussing it. He gave record executives and radio stations what they wanted instead of what the band needed. He chose the easy path, the guaranteed hit, the song that would please everyone while challenging nobody. Even the promotional film they created felt hollow, with the band members dressed in costumes and dancing around pretending to have fun while their eyes revealed boredom and exhaustion. Hello Goodbye represents everything Paul regrets about his approach during that period. It marks the moment he started writing for charts rather than for himself, choosing safety over risk and becoming a professional hitmaker instead of an artist. The worst part is that the strategy worked perfectly. The song was ubiquitous, which only proved that sometimes commercial success feels like artistic failure. The final and most painful entry on Paul's regret list is Let It Be, paradoxically his most famous composition. This song should have been his crowning achievement. He wrote it during the darkest days of the band's collapse, inspired by a dream in which his deceased mother appeared to offer comfort. The original version was beautiful in its simplicity, just Paul on piano with his voice raw and honest, singing about finding peace during troubled times. It was intensely personal and intimate, like a private conversation between souls. But that's not the version the world knows. Producer Phil Spector took control of the recordings and buried Paul's simplicity under layers of orchestral arrangements, choirs, and production techniques that transformed intimacy into grand spectacle. When Paul heard what Spector had done, he felt physically ill. He fought desperately to stop the release, arguing with the other Beatles and begging them to use his original mix instead. But by that point, the band was breaking up, and nobody was listening to anyone anymore. John sided with Spector's approach. George didn't care enough to fight about it. Ringo was simply trying to survive the chaos. Paul watched helplessly as his song about his mother became someone else's creative vision. The irony cuts particularly deep because he wrote Let It Be as a message of hope and comfort, a reminder that light exists even in darkness. Instead, the song became forever associated with the Beatles' breakup, with loss and endings and things that cannot be repaired. For decades afterward, whenever someone told Paul that Let It Be was their favorite Beatles song, he would smile and express gratitude. But internally, he heard only what the song could have been in its pure original form. He spent years trying to get his intended version properly released. He finally succeeded in 2021 with a reissue that stripped away Spector's production and returned to his simple vision. However, the damage was already done. The overproduced version is embedded in everyone's memory as the definitive recording, the song that's played at weddings and funerals, the song that represents the Beatles' legacy. Let It Be taught Paul the cruelest lesson of all. You can write something from your deepest heart and still lose ownership of what it means. Success and personal satisfaction aren't the same thing. Sometimes your greatest commercial hit becomes your greatest heartbreak, and there's nothing you can do except live with that reality.